All right, all right. Welcome everybody to the Life Between All or Nothing. I'm Scott J.
And I'm Mary Kay.
Yeah, that was your cue. You come in. And this show is all about Mary Kay and I believing with all of our hearts and all of our experiences that you should never be stuck in your life. You can always make changes. It doesn't matter when. And if you're not living your best life today, if you're constantly waiting for your best life to come later, you're never going to live it. And isn't that kind of like what we're saying here, Mary Kay?
It sure is. And, it's not always about making the big, giant changes. Our show is about the life between all or nothing, right? So the small changes stack up. They can be micro changes, micro moments, even, and they will stack up to get you moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. So don't sit there and, like our good friend Chris Roush would say, don't make excuses.
Yeah.
Don't sit there and pretend that you can't make changes. If you're not happy with something, if you want to look for somebody to blame for the state of your life and the fact that you're unhappy, it's as close as your nearest mirror to find the person to blame. Figure it out,
Yeah.
find a way to do it. But we're here for you, and we'd like to talk to you guys about that. So reach out to us on our Facebook pages, and certainly you can go to mkranger.com and learn more about Mary Kay. Very shortly, you'll be going to soberlifeart.com to learn more about me. It's being launched as we speak. So hopefully by the time you guys sit and watch this, it will be up. But find out more about us. And if there's something you want to talk about, or if you want to be a guest on our show, reach out to us and let us know, because we'd love to have you.
Mm-hmm.
But please, if you're one of those people who likes to sit around and complain that you can't do anything, this is not the show for you. This is not. Or maybe it's the exact show you need to hear. Karen Hurley's already here. Karen Hurley.
Hi, Karen.
And of course, we've got Mom with us.
And hi, Sandy Mom.
Sandy Mom with us. We've got a good guest today. Ranger's having he's having a party there, isn't he?
Oh, can you hear him? And that's upstairs. So I don't know what he's barking at.
Yeah, somebody decided to park down the street. Now Ranger's going to let everybody in the neighborhood know.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit about our guest because this is a guy who's from my neck of the woods, somebody that I run into probably 2 or 3 times a month at different events and different organizations that we both participate in. His name is Justin Giovinazzo. And don't worry, I don't have to figure all that out because everybody calls him Gio. Everybody calls him Gio. He is a CAC. He is currently a primary therapist at a treatment center for substance abuse disorders, and that's up at Port St. Lucie, which is about an hour north or hour and a half north of Fort Lauderdale area. So that's where he's at. He has many years of continuous sobriety himself. He's got a great story of his own. He's overcome many difficulties in his life, and he has an amazing testimony. He devotes his life to helping others overcome the same obstacles that he once faced. And that's really the deal of it. People like Justin, and here's his book, Fear, Face Everything and Rise. I love the way he took that word fear and he turned it into something positive like that. But this is how we all learn. It's by having people like you, Mary Kay, like Justin, who have gone through things and decided, I'm not going to be quiet about it. I'm going to share it with people. And that's how people get to learn things and grow, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So let's bring on Gio.
Let's bring him on. I was just getting ready to set the stage because I know if I leave up our little top banner, somebody's head's going to get cut off. So there we go. We'll switch to our other banner. And we will bring in, there he is, our friend, again, Justin Giovinazzo, but we go by Gio. Gio, how are you today?
Good. How are you guys doing tonight?
Good. Good to see you.
Fantastic. Now, before we get into, because I want to talk about your book and talk about all the things you do, just real quick, you live in Florida. What's your life today that you live, just so people can kind of get to know who you are right now?
Sure. So right now I am currently 8 years sober from drugs and alcohol. I am a primary therapist in treatment, as you mentioned. I also recently took on the role as clinical outreach coordinator for the company that I work.
All right.
I'm involved in two 12-step fellowships. Um, for anonymity purposes, I won't say the names of those. And basically, I just live my life in recovery and I help everybody else, anybody that I can, just because of, you know, I guess, the way my addiction, you know, in my addiction, I should say, I felt like recovery wasn't possible. And then once I got a taste of recovery and I seen that it was real, it's like I want to share it with everybody else.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful.
Absolutely. And we're so happy, and certainly applaud, like we should with all other people who work in that field trying to help people. We applaud your efforts and what you're doing. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. There's probably many easier jobs you can do. I know Duncan is hiring and McDonald's and other places. And you don't cry yourself to sleep over the French fries at McDonald's, but there's nights when it's really hard to put our heads on the pillow because we're fighting a battle that oftentimes we lose with people. How do you handle that, brother?
A lot of self-care. I have my support system. I have a very strong support system that I go to when I'm struggling. And then my spirituality.
Yes.
Now, Mary Kay also is decided to put her stuff out there and start helping people. And I know you've had this bloom go on with you recently. And again, that's the same thing, is that you don't always get to deal with things that change easily, do you?
No.
Yeah, no. And I think the thing is, the more that we tell our stories and our struggles, including our current struggles, it's almost like it gives permission for others to do it as well. And I think that is so important for people to see that it's okay to talk about these things.
Absolutely. Glenda Stockton has joined us. She said, "That's my brother." I assume she's talking about you, Gio.
Oh, yeah.
Glenda.
Glenda, thanks for joining us. And, if you have any comments, if you haven't watched one of our shows before, if you're watching on Facebook, write in the comments, type it in, we'll see it. If you're on YouTube, you can comment on there. We'll see it there as well. All right. Yeah. So let's get started. You have a book.
Yes.
Fear, Face Everything and Rise. And it's not a difficult read. It's something that's very straight to the point. There's a chapter here on childhood trauma, and it starts off with, I was born in New Jersey. You don't have to say anything beyond that to understand trauma as a child, right? I lived 20 years in Jersey, man. That's trauma in itself. But first of all, why write this book? Why was this book important for you to get out there?
Sure. So at 5 years sober, I lost my father due to cancer, and it triggered a lot of my childhood trauma. So, not knowing what was going on with me, I started seeking the answers through recovery, and I don't know, it was like I had this void inside of me, and I didn't want to drink or drug, but I also wouldn't have cared, if a car crashed in front of me and my life ended that day, right? And that's a scary place to be for someone 5 years sober.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to a therapist friend of mine, and I started originally seeing her for grief and loss therapy, and then it turned into childhood trauma therapy. And at the same time, I was working with a mentor of mine, and we were working on the 4-step. I was doing another 4-step in the 12-step program, and he had me doing a very thorough fear inventory. And at the same time, I'm doing the childhood trauma therapy, and I'm doing this fear inventory, this very, very thorough fear inventory. I've seen the correlation. And seeing the correlation, I've seen how, during my childhood, I had programmed a lot of stuff in my core belief system. And there's a, how do I say this? There's a book on recovery that's helped a lot of people. And inside of that book, it says that we're driven on 100 forms of fear. And that sentence right there took on so much meaning to me when I seen how my whole life was programmed on fear from a young child. And I started teaching this in the groups that I was running for the treatment center that I work at. And I started seeing like clients like have those aha moments, and I started to see the clients change. Well, if it was up to me, I probably would have never wrote the book, but everybody kept telling me to write the book, write the book. So my mentor told me that if something presents itself, to pray on it and the answer will appear. Well, I started writing the book and I put it down for a little bit. And one day I picked it back up and honestly, it just flowed, and it came out and I let some people read it. And, it was the same thing. People were reading it and they liked it. And they told me I had to get that information out there.
Nice.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow. And
That's beautiful.
I think a lot of us, we have, you surround yourself with good people. They'll push you into doing good things for yourself. If you're around a bunch of friends who never challenge you, get some new friends. You love no, seriously, having people that challenge us. I mean, Mary and I talk about it a lot. There's always people saying something to us, and it's like, well, maybe I need to go try that, and that's how things happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see, Gene.
Opening your mind.
Gene's with us. Yes, Gene's with us. My problem is that every time things are going good, I think I tend to ruin it. So she's self-sabotage. Yeah. I mean, I think we could all relate to that at some points in our lives. Self-sabotage.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
For Gene, ask yourself what might be behind that. Like, see what the root cause might be. And I know, Gio, you're probably going to talk about root cause as well. It's always good to get to the root cause because, yeah, sure, great things happen. And maybe it's that you feel like you don't deserve it, or you're afraid that there's some fear, and there's got to be some root cause behind that fear, and treat the root cause instead of treating the symptoms only. So maybe, Gio, you can probably expand on that a bit.
No, I mean, you said it perfect. And there usually is some kind of root cause. And usually it's some kind of subconscious programming that we have. We don't realize it on a conscious level. But, somewhere deep down, she feels like she doesn't deserve something, right? And I've lived that, I think it was Nelson Mandela said that, he wasn't fearful of failure. He's experienced failure. He was comfortable with failure, right? But he was fearful of success. And every time he started to achieve success, he would self-sabotage. And I remember reading that and I was like, wow, that's me.
That's amazing.
I urge people not to fall to the lowest common denominator in this, which is everybody runs into this thing. They say, well, I fear success. I have a fear of success. And really that's kind of like, it's that quick answer that everybody says. It's like, I don't like, what? Everybody likes success. You know what the real fear is? The fear is letting go of, the fear is not being the fear is becoming responsible. The fear is having to stand on our own 2 feet. It's not about the success itself. Everybody wants success. You want to hand me $1 million? I'm not afraid of it. Trust me. I'll grab it. I'll knock your ass down and I'll take it. Okay. It's no problem. It's a Jersey thing, right? Yeah. I got no problem with that. But if you tell me I got to work, here's your $1 million. Now you've got to do the work for it. All of a sudden I start thinking about, I'm not capable. I don't want that kind of responsibility. And I think a lot of times self-sabotage is rooted in the fact that we don't want to take responsibility for our own happiness, our own success, and our own motivations. So I encourage you to look at that. Just don't stop at fear of success, because the truth is there is no such thing as fear of success. Everybody wants success. They're just afraid to leave what they already know to get to it. The real fear is in leaving what you know. And even with some of these things that you talk about in your book here, which is, like I said, I just love how brilliantly this is written out here. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm sorry. This is I'm tagging in from one of my other shows. Murdaugh was just found guilty.
Oops.
Murdaugh was just found guilty.
Wow.
And I won a bet. I said it would be a quick jury and a quick guilty, and I was right. So all you people out there, I should have lots of coffees coming my way. I'm telling you right now.
Email Therese, your co-host, right now.
Yeah, I will. So you go to some of the real basics in fear, like fear of death and fear of all those other things. But
Sure.
you know, where do you find the kind of that starting point? You know, how does fearfulness and living in fear start to manifest itself in people? Because you take this all the way
Mhm.
back to childhood. Why do we adopt that culture of fear? Do you have a theory behind that, or do you just kind of?
Well, it's almost like passed down generation to generation, right? So, for instance,
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons that it was so hard for me to originally get in therapy, and it took for my dad to die, when I was 5 years sober, is I still had a subconscious programming that men don't get vulnerable, right? That men don't cry,
Ah.
that men don't show weakness. And although I knew it
Yeah.
on a conscious level and I'm teaching it to my clients and I'm talking about it, there was still a part of me that was holding on to something, right? And I had to look at where that came from. So my dad didn't teach me that verbally, but my dad, um, I watched him and it became learned behavior, right? I knew my dad when he was angry. I knew my dad when he was extremely happy. And besides that, my dad was very stoic. He didn't talk about his emotions. He didn't really show his emotions. And this was like a learned behavior, right? So, and it could be anything, so, it could go as far back as, for instance, parents teaching if you're good, you'll get a piece of candy after dinner. You get a piece of cake after dinner, right? And
Mhm.
like what they're teaching the kid is, if he doesn't get that piece of cake, maybe mom and dad can't afford that cake that night, or that candy that night, or that toy. And, instead of telling that kid, hey, like we just can't afford it, they maybe feel a little shameful and a little guilty and give the kid an attitude, right? So the kid
Mm.
learns in that moment he's not a good kid and he's not lovable. And
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like much, it seems kind of superficial, like talking about it, but like it trauma affects everybody different, right? So a kid that goes through that situation might just deal with it in that moment and throw it in the back of his head and try to go throughout the rest of life, right? But like we are talking about the fear of success, maybe every time that kid goes for something, whether it's a test in school, whether it's the baseball team, right? There's this theme. Maybe he's just not good at sports and he doesn't make the baseball team. So what it does is reaffirm that message over and over again. Maybe he's 12 years old, 14 years old, and he gets his first girlfriend. And it's puppy love, so it's not going to last. But, maybe after a week, she breaks up with him. And then so there's a
Mm.
theme in that life of that child, right? And it's just reaffirming this message, you know?
Wow. So you tied a lot of things into almost like a cultural reference of, that. And let me see. I'm going to try to guess Giovinazzo. That's Dutch.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't want to just say Italian and just, what if I'm wrong?
What if you're wrong?
But you know what? But Mary Kay, I mean, does this make sense to you? Because you have very, um, your family's very steeped in their culture, being Greek and coming over and all this stuff. Does some of that
Yeah.
transfer into how you carry yourself in life and even instilling some fears and things?
Well, it did. It doesn't anymore until I
Oh,
recognized
well,
that
there
it
you go.
did. So, yeah, coming from a Greek culture very similar to Italian, where there was distinct roles for men and women, the male and female thing. And so that gets installed, of course, at a very young age, not just by being told about it, by your parents modeling that behavior. Like for you, Gio, your dad modeled that stoic behavior. And so, yeah, the roles were defined in my family, even to the point of having the double standard. Like my brother is younger than me. He was allowed to go out. I wasn't. I was home taking care of the home while my mom was working. And so that was a huge influence on my life, as well as myself thinking that I had this role and I had this script held by other people and I had to follow it. And by following it, I would gain approval. Right. And then that just cemented it with a reward, right, that I carried
Mhm.
right through till I turned 40. So, yes, that was a long way of saying yes. I can completely relate to the cultural influences and programming too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, mine wasn't necessarily wasn't steeped in any kind of culture other than the like Gio was saying, you know, men don't cry, and you know, you take care of business and suck it up, buttercup, and you know, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. Showing emotions was weakness. And although my mom was a very emotional person, my father was not at the time. Um, and some of that has changed over the years, and he's become more open emotionally, thank God. But
Mhm.
during my childhood, but there was also a lot of chaos going on,
Mm.
and you know, I don't think people recognize, and that's why one of the reasons I like looking at your book here, Gio, is because I don't think people recognize how much of that stuff you carry with you, even though you
Mm.
think, "Hey, I'm past it; it's over; it's in the past. Forget about it." Right? I'm doing my thing. Everything is cool, and they don't realize that you know, one north blowing breeze one day could bring all that stuff back. You just don't know.
Mhm.
So, in dealing with yourself, Gio, and dealing with clients, um, how much of that baggage is hidden from people? Do people always carry that much and not even know they're carrying that much stuff?
I believe so. You know, and it varies per individual, but I would say a lot of people carry it around, and it's on a subconscious level. They don't realize they're carrying it around,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the driving force. Those fears are the driving force behind all of their decision making, right? So, as we were talking earlier about, you know, I gave the example of the person that went through the trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if that person is constantly like seeking validation through things, you know, they might, if as they're trying to achieve success in their life and they're trying to find happiness, you know, maybe they're always going to take the shortcut because at the end of the day, they don't, deep down on a subconscious level, their fear is that they're inadequate, right? So
Yeah.
maybe instead of going for that job they really want, they'll settle for them. And I'm not knocking McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts, but you mentioned it earlier, so I'm going to use it as an example. But you know, maybe instead of going for the job they really want, they'll settle for something that they know that they can do good at, and they don't have to put in much
Yeah.
effort. You know, it's the same thing in relationships. You see a lot of people settle in relationships, and instead of going for something really that they really want, and then they end up unhappy, and then they end up breaking up with that person, and they went into a relationship very selfishly because they chose their partner, and this is serious, you know, on a surface, a subconscious level. You know, they're going into a relationship and they're picking a partner that they feel is like somebody that, you know, won't leave them, right? And they're not going in because they love that partner, and they don't realize that. And then they go into this relationship and then they're unhappy, and then the relationships end up breaking up. And then once again, it's one more thing reaffirming that message, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
I think you've
Mary,
been
something got
reading.
you right there.
What's that?
Yeah, because I'm like, oh my God, Gio's been reading my diary. Dang, 'cause
Well,
that was
no,
Hey,
that was
folks, he ain't all better yet. He's getting there, but he
yeah.
ain't all better yet.
yeah.
I definitely see myself in that description of getting into relationships with uh, thinking that it was something I could work, something I could control, and then not realizing at the time, hindsight is 2020, not realizing at the time that it was not what I wanted, and I was not a good fit for that person. Um, and then yeah, ultimately ending up hurting them and saying, sorry, you know, we're not a good fit after 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So yeah, I see
Yeah.
myself in that for sure. Now I have a question for you, Gio. So, you know, we see where you are now and your life is dedicated to in service to others. And you're 8 years into your continuous sobriety. What was the aha moment that got you into recovery? Like what was that taste that you talked about?
Okay.
Oh, this is going to
So
be
Uh-oh.
a good one. He's already chuckling.
yeah.
Folks,
Um,
get your popcorn. Here we go.
yeah, they're gonna need it. So, you know, my addiction started full throttle at the age of 14. You know, 18-year long drug addiction.
Wow.
I made a couple attempts at recovery, but, you know, once again, fear, going into it with fear. You know, am I going to like this sober life? Is this sober life going to be boring? am I going to have a sponsor or a therapist or a mentor like telling me what to do, right?
Mm.
So every time I'd go in, I would go in and I wouldn't really put in that much effort, and then I would leave and I'd tell you guys, oh, see, it didn't work. Um, but after 18 years of drug and alcohol addiction, what happened was that I was dating a girl, and things were getting really bad, and her family stepped in, and her family gave her the ultimatum that they were going to take her kids away if she didn't go to treatment.
Wow.
So I looked at her and I told her, I said, listen, you have insurance, I don't have insurance. Listen, you're not as bad as me, so you go to treatment, get your kids back. Like, don't worry about me. Like, there's no hope for me. And so she wouldn't leave unless I would go to a program. So I found a place that would take me with no insurance. And so she left at 6 p.m. Her mom came pick her up to drive her down to Fort Lauderdale. And I wanted one last night of ripping and running, right? And I went out and I did a lot of drugs. I did a lot of alcohol. And for some reason that night, I was not getting higher drunk. They weren't working, which is insane because I did a lot. And
Mm.
then I became resentful. I became angry. I became mad because I wanted one last night of, doing something before I went to this treatment center. And so I started committing crimes. I started robbing people, selling people fake drugs, breaking into cars, and I ended up getting arrested. Now, looking back now, I
Wow.
was more insane. Yeah, I was more insane probably than high or drunk. Um, and so I landed in jail. And while I'm in there, she starts writing me and she starts telling me how good recovery is. And, she's just has this hope for this new life. And um, let's see, Thanksgiving, my dad bonds me out. And when I get out, she's this ex girlfriend of mine, who was my girlfriend at that time. She's involved in a 12-step fellowship. She's in the halfway. She's in the IOP program. She's got a sponsor, and she's going to these meetings. And I go to these meetings with her, and it was the first time I found the young people's meetings.
Mm.
And I went into these meetings, and I'm talking to people, and they use drugs and alcohol the same way I did. And they had, a year of sobriety, 3 years of sobriety. So I started feeling like it was possible. But once again, I
Mm.
came in and I had a fear that I was inadequate. And after getting that hope that maybe it was possible, that fear started kicking in and my mind starts going. And all of a sudden, I started separating myself from everybody.
Mm.
They really didn't use like I did. I'm too far gone. There's no help for me. God's not going to work for me. It might work for them, but they're not as bad as me. And that fear took me out. And I went out and I was running again. I was still going to meetings every day. Once I picked back up, it was really hard for me. Like I needed some kind of separation. And during that relapse, I committed more crimes and I landed back in jail. And
Wow.
this time I was on bond. So, being on bond and catching a new charge, you can't bond out of jail again. You're stuck. And anyways, the drug program, I mean, the jail offered a drug program. And I signed up for this drug program. And while I'm in there, I was a parrot. I was regurgitating all the stuff I heard in the meetings. And like recovery like was up here, but it wasn't in here yet.
Yeah.
And while I was in there, one day my lawyer comes to see me, and I go, to go see her in the area where you have the visitation with them. And she opens up this, briefcase, and she pulls out this folder, and she puts this folder on the table, and she looks at me, and she goes, "I got the deal from the state attorney." And I'm like, "Okay, like what is it?" And she looks at me and she goes, "Well, this is your third time going to prison. So in Florida by law, you have to get a habitual felony offender sentence." And she looks at me and she goes, "You're getting 30 years day for day in the state of Florida."
Oh my
And I
God.
remember looking at her. Yeah. And I remember looking at her and I was like, "Well, I'm not taking it. So like, go get me another deal." And she looks at me and and she looks at me and she's like, "Well, I guess you're not getting what I'm saying." She goes, "By law, you're getting 30 years day for day, no game time."
Oh my God.
And she, yeah. And she got up and she slammed her briefcase shut and like she left. And I remember sitting there and that feeling I felt. And I remember I said, my addiction took me too far this time. Like there's no coming back. Like I always, anytime I had wiggle room, being an addict or an alcoholic, if I have wiggle room, I'm going to beat the system. And now the system has beaten me, right? Actually, I beat myself. But so I remember going back to the dorm after getting that news. And the first person I called was that ex girlfriend of mine who was my girlfriend at that time. And as soon as she answers the phone, she's like, hey, me and you need to talk. And I'm like, yeah, we do. And she's like, well, let me go first. She goes, my sponsor said that me and you are toxic and I'm leaving you. And then I'm like, well, good, because I'm getting 30 years. And I hang up on her. And
Oh
then
my
the
God.
second phone, yeah, it gets worse. Or actually it gets better because, it was my rock bottom. So the second phone call is to my parents. Now at this time, my mom wasn't talking to me at all, but my dad was always there no matter what. And I call, my mom answers, and she's like, hey, she's like, your lawyer just called here, and your lawyer just talked to your dad, and I don't know what your lawyer said to your dad, but your dad had a heart attack while she's on the phone with her. And he's in the ambulance, he's on his way to the hospital. She goes, you probably killed your dad. Don't call back here till you get, or don't
Oh
call
my
back here
God.
ever again. And she hangs up. And I'm like, all right, I have one more phone call. And I call my second son's mother, and she answers the phone. And she says, listen, she goes, I just talked to your other son's mother, and both of your kids are acting out at home. They're acting out of school, and you did this because you're back in jail. And she goes, don't call back here till you get your life together. And she hangs up. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I just got the worst news of my life. I'm facing 30 years. I'm going away for 30 years. And I have nobody to share this bad news with. I'm like, my addiction took me too far and there's no coming back. My life's over. And I remember walking up to my jail cell and I was planning my suicide.
Oh,
And I had it planned out. I was just waiting for one of the last doors to shut where I knew nobody would get to me. And I'm sitting there and I'm listening for this last door to shut, and I get this moment of clarity. And it was like, it was in my own voice, but it said, listen, your dad, he's in the ambulance, he's on his way to the hospital, he might not die. So if you were to kill yourself, you might give him a heart attack. Or if your dad does die and then you kill yourself, your family's going to be planning 2 funerals. Don't be selfish. Then I started
mm,
justifying, well, if I get 30 years, at least I can watch my kids grow up through visitation and pictures. And then I was like, you know what? I might not get these 30 years, so let me just wait. And like I said, I had intent to do it, and I had everything ready. So once like I got that moment of clarity, I actually had like a sheet tied around my neck. I pulled the sheet
oh,
off, and anyways, they had count time from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock, the doors popped, and they had a volunteer that came from the outside to bring in a 12-step meeting.
mm,
And as soon as we go down there, I was like, I have to tell somebody. Like I just had so much emotion going on.
yeah.
And as soon as it came time for me to share it, like I raised my hand and I shared about everything, about the 30 years, about no one accepting my phone call, about the girlfriend breaking up with me, about me about to kill myself. And after that meeting, the volunteer came up to me and he said, hey, how about, I meet you every Wednesday in the chapel. We'll get permission and I'll take you through the 12 steps. And I said, yes.
Oh,
In the beginning, I didn't trust my sponsor. He's what you'd call an old timer. I didn't think he would relate to me. I thought he would judge me for all the bad things I've done. But that man literally saved my life by taking me through the work.
wow. What an
So, so,
incredible story.
so essentially, nothing happened. You just decided to get sober. That I joke. I
Oh,
joke because the totality of all of that put together. I've heard stories where any one of those events would have been enough to get
yeah.
somebody to make a change, and here you had these things all happening at the same time.
Mhm.
Certainly, we're not saying that the whole world was happening to you. You were causing a lot of these problems. We all
I
understand that.
caused it
But
all.
yeah, yeah, we certainly understand that. But but to have that perfect storm of insanity come together, where it's like I've got no other choice but to try something different. Was that kind of where your head was at? Listen, there's nothing else here. I may as well try something, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was the last house on the block.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. And that's a story we find with a lot of people out there. And you know what? And this isn't just about alcoholism and drug addiction. This could be about getting help for mental health conditions. This could be about dealing with bad relationships. This could be about dealing with being in a bad job and things like that. You end up with all these signs and all these perfect storm ideas coming on around you. And it's just saying the one common denominator in all this is that I'm still here in this mess. Why don't I extricate myself and do something different? And I got to ask, how long was it before you really, because I know at the beginning we're all just kind of like, I'm just trying to stay afloat. I just don't want to die today, you know? Was there a point when you could say that the worm turned and you said, this is my life, this is what I really want? When did that happen for you?
Sure. So right after my fifth step, as I mentioned, in the beginning, I didn't trust my sponsor. I thought he was going to judge me when I went over some of the details of my life, and I got vulnerable with him. And I remember sitting across from him, and as I'm doing my fifth step, and I'm confessing all of my resentments and my shortcomings and my fears, and I'm going through everything. And as soon as I got done, he looked at me and he says, "Is that it?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yes." And then he looked at me and he goes, "Well, the good news is I forgive you, and so does God." And right there in that moment, I had what is called a white light spiritual awakening. So we did it in the chapel of the jail, the local jail. And the officer actually stood in the room the last 15 minutes because we went over an hour. It was like an hour and 15 minutes. And as soon as we got done, like the officer literally grabbed me by the shoulders, picked me up, and he goes, "Come on, we're late." He said, "You're 15 minutes late because of you, and I got to go get another inmate." But anyways, as me and the officer are walking down the hallway, to kind of paint a picture for you, the windows are up real high. It was raining out that day, so it was really gray and dark. And the lights are kind of spread out like very far in the hallway, so the lighting's not that good. And the walls are supposed to be painted white, but they're like this yellow white because they don't paint them that often. And I remember looking at the officer, and the walls were glowing. They were like bright fluorescent white. And I remember looking at the officer, and I'm like, "Did you guys just paint the walls?" And he's like, "No, why?" And I'm like, "The walls are glowing." And I'll never forget the officer cocked his head and gave me this look, like kind of like, "What kind of psych meds are you on?" You know? But I had this feeling like, honestly, it was like electricity was going through my body. And anyways, afterwards, like I had shared with some people what had happened, and some other volunteers came in that night, and I told them what happened. They're like, they're like, "You had a white light spiritual awakening, just like Bill Wilson did in the hospital." So I went, and I opened up my book, and I read it, and I was like, "Wow, like this thing's for real." And honestly, I've been on fire ever since for recovery because like it's real to me.
Absolutely. And people have all sorts of awakenings into their life. Some of them are very spiritual in nature. Some of them are very practical in nature, where you just, one day you wake up, you look at things, and it's like, it just makes sense to you. And those are those great moments as well that we have in our lives. And sometimes it's that hit yourself in the freaking head moments when you take a look around and you're just like, I did this shit. This is me, those. And I think those are the ones that most people have most often. It's like when they have the realization that, what am I bitching about? I chose this, and this is where I'm at. So let's get back to fear, because I didn't really want to focus on fear.
Okay.
Face everything and rise. Fear has been described in many different ways. F everything and run. False evidence appearing real. I like that one too. There's so many different little things, and you came up with face everything and rise. What exactly do you mean by that? Just give us, what does that mean to you?
Okay, so I've heard that acronym somewhere before, and it just stuck with me. But I realized at 5 years sober, when I was going through the work again and I was doing the trauma therapy plus the intense fear inventory, I realized there was a lot of stuff that I stuffed so deep inside of me that I was kind of scared
Mm.
to, even address, right? And I would just act like it's not there. And,
Right.
Mhm.
you know, in a sense, we do bury it, Um, but it's crazy. It's because as soon as I like started working through those things, like it was not as big of a deal as like I made it out to be. And honestly, like once I started going through the work again on a deeper level, like the change was like instant, right? And I felt it, and like I was happy again. And once again, I was on fire for recovery, and I wanted to share this news with everybody.
Okay. Mary Kay, you
That's
were reacting
amazing.
when I was doing the false evidence appearing real. Is that something that you always kind of followed with?
Yeah, so that's one of the ones that I've followed with for, the acronym for fear. But I have a question for you, Gio. So
Sure.
there's these things that are buried and they were probably buried when you were a young child, and that the fear of a 7-year-old and the fear of a 30-year-old is very different, right?
Yes.
So how did you get, like, how did you find those? How did you find those in your subconscious? Like, what kind of work did you have to do to uncover them? And I know you mentioned an inventory. So what is that?
Okay, sure. So, for instance, as I mentioned, when my dad died, like a lot of memories started like trickling in that I had buried and
Hmm.
suffocated. And I started there, right? So I had to look at some of them, and like honestly, like I guess the first one I started with was the fact that my dad was always there for me, and I mentioned that in my
Mm,
story earlier.
yeah.
And now I was like left to, in a sense, I was forced to be a man. I didn't have anybody to rely on. It was just me. And that was scary for me. And I didn't realize it. Like I said, it was on a subconscious level. Um, so I had to look at why, right? And I already kind of had a storyline because by the time I started doing the work, I'm already 5 years sober. So I started tracing them back. Um, you know, in my book, I talk about my childhood trauma when I went through my bullying at the age of 7 when I moved to Florida. So I dialed it back to then. And then as I was doing the work on that, like deeper issues, deeper memories were surfacing. And I realized, I had a memory at the age of 1 where my parents were arguing in front of me and being a scared little kid. And I was like, okay, if I cry louder, my parents will love me enough to stop arguing. So I made
Mm,
myself at 1 years old cry louder, and my parents stopped. They looked at me and they went back to fighting. So I'm like, okay, if I jump on the ground and I kick and scream and I punch the carpet and I kick the carpet, they're gonna love me enough to stop crying or to stop fighting. And I'm doing it like I'm a little kid and I'm doing it. I'm throwing my temper tantrum and I'm looking at them and they're still arguing. Right. So me
mm,
at the age of 39 now, like I've been in some arguments with girlfriends. So, you know, it's not necessarily that the child wasn't loved, but to that 1 year old at that time, he felt like he wasn't getting, like his parents didn't love him enough to stop for him. Right. So his security threatened, his, emotional, how do I say this? His emotional needs are not being met in that moment. He
yeah.
doesn't feel loved in that moment. He doesn't feel safe in that moment. Right. And I realized it was kind of like a theme since the age of 1. So I had to like look at that and looking at it, like I said, the 1 year old is going to experience it different than someone that's 39. When I was
Hmm.
7 years old and I went through that trauma, looking at it when I was 31, going through, the process the first time was different than doing it again. Actually, I was 37 when I started it again. So when I was 37, looking back, it's different than looking at it as a 31-year-old or the 7-year-old. You know,
Wow.
Wow, tracing
Ronald
it
is
back. Wow.
commenting, what an incredible story, Justin. So glad you lived to tell your amazing story. And of course, we're all very
Hmm.
glad that you're here to tell the story.
Yes.
This is Sandy, one of our followers. She's also known to me personally as this is my mom, actually, too. So,
Hi,
Justin, my
Mom.
mom is asking you a question. So answer it right, or
okay.
she'll hoof you one. Um, how did Gio not go to prison? How did you, here you were looking at 30, no, do not pass go, do not collect $200, and now you're out and about. How did that all come about?
Sure. So this question always gets asked. Um, so during that process of me going through, the 12 steps, and I was in that drug program. They kept me on for it was a 90-day program. I ended up staying in there 7 months, and I stayed in there as a mentor
Wow.
just because my change was so profound. So during that process, I go to court, and they were offering me the 30 years, and I pled out in front of the judge. And the judge, as he's like taking the 30-year offer from the state attorney, he looks at me and he says, "Do you have anything to say?" And I just spoke from the heart. I told the judge for the first time ever, I'm sober. I'm honestly working a program. I've experienced a change. I said how I stayed on to mentor other people, and I found a love for recovery and helping others. And I looked at him and I took accountability. I've always played the victim in my life, up until I got sober. It was everybody else's fault. It was the judge's fault. It's the girlfriend's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's, the people who made the opiates. I'm not going to say any company names, but I could blame it on them, right? I can go through the whole process. I can blame it on the doctors that prescribed me the medication at 14, right? It was always somebody else's fault. But I looked at the judge and I took accountability, and I begged him. I said, "Listen, I did everything and I'm guilty. And I'm not trying to get out of this sentence, but I'm saying this sentence I think is unfair because I finally have changed, and I'm begging you to give me another chance." And that judge took a recess, and he came back after about 5 minutes, and he looked at me and he goes, "I don't know why I'm doing this, but I'm not going to give you the 30 years. He said, "What I am going to do is give you a 6-year prison sentence followed by a 4-year probation sentence, which is a total of 10 years. And he still found me guilty of being a habitual felony offender."
Sure.
So to me, that was my higher power, because even as I was getting, after he went through that sentence, and the lady like walks me over and she's like fingerprint me to process me, I'm sitting there and I was like calm and I felt peace. And I'm like, am I in shock right now? Because like this is the most time I've ever gotten, and it's not 30 years, but it's still a lot. And I heard this like little calm voice said, no matter what you go through, God's going to be there with you. And He was. I didn't do the 6 years. I did, a little over 4 years. But while I was in there, I jumped right into, into my recovery. Drugs are very bad in the state that we're in the prison system. The officers really don't care what goes on there. They don't get paid enough to care. And not many people want to get sober, but I jumped in. I started mentoring other men. I started actually like the first publications where I found out I was good at writing. I started writing a recovery magazine. They started publishing them.
Wow.
I started teaching an IOP program. I actually earned my CAC while I was in there. The IOP program, they took me on and started mentoring me. We found an organization that would work with me while I was in there to help me. I found another organization that paid for it. And, God just opened up the doors. My higher power opened up the doors.
Unbelievable.
Wow. And you were open to it, right?
100%.
You were open to all these things. Yeah, wow.
And
good for
to
you.
take advantage, I mean, a lot of people might have just closed shop at that point. It's like, listen, I'm caught, I'm done, I'm going to jail. I'm just going to go all in on thug life at this point, and I'm done. That's where a lot of people would have gone, and they give up. They give up on even finding any hope or love or anything. You did the opposite. You said, okay, now that I'm here, I'm going to dig my heels in and find something. It's in the darkest coal mines where you find the brightest diamonds. And that's what you did. That's where you were. And you were in a dark place, in a scary place, and you plucked these diamonds out of there, and you came out of here a rich man. I don't know about rich in money. I mean, I don't know, but you came out of here rich in knowledge and in faith and friendship and in purpose, and we appreciate you for that. Shawshank, man, I'm telling you, it's amazing. I'm like so. I knew parts of your story, but I never heard the whole thing. And I know you were telling it before. I had missed out on it. So I'm really glad we got to hear this. Mary Kay, I mean, I've never been like kind of speechless about somebody's story, but this part right here really gets me. I'm not sure what to say about it. What are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm feeling. I mean, I'm in awe for sure, because there were a billion different combinations of possibilities that this could have gone, right? A million ways that could have gone from the moment of being told about those 30 years, excuse me, and almost taking your own life, right? You were minutes away from doing that, and something got you to think down a different train track, right? And yeah, it just amazes me. And I know, because you mentioned spirituality, how much of a role does spirituality have in your life now?
It's everything.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here where I am today if it wasn't for my beliefs. And that was another thing I had to work through in my early recovery, is because I didn't really have this higher power, this concept of this higher power. And that was another thing that was kind of weighing me down, is the belief system that I did have and what a higher power was.
Right. Absolutely. I just want to. We got Ron saying congratulations. Sandy saying that's amazing. Karen Hurley's with us. She says, "Love you, Gio. Gio,
Love you,
Karen very well, and wishing you success, Justin.
Thank you.
You've touched our listeners. You've certainly touched our heart. Your book. I encourage everybody to pick it up. Listen. This is not an expensive thing to pick up and have. And like I said, it's a great reference. You can read it as a book. You can use it as a reference. I like the way that you put it out there. Mm-hmm. So Fear, Face Everything, and Rise. You can get it from Amazon. And of course, it's Justin Giovinazzo. And now that you guys all know them out there, you can say, my personal friend Gio wrote this damn book. So read the damn thing.
So, quick announcement.
Please.
Starting tomorrow, if you have a Kindle, it's going to be free on Kindle for the next 7 days. And then also, I dropped the price tonight to $9.99 for any of the listeners that want to buy it. Anything I make off that book, what I do is I buy more copies and I send them into jails and prisons. And it's not so much about profit for me. And also, Fear 2 is going to be a workbook, and it should be released in about 2 weeks.
Wow. All right.
That's amazing. And that's so generous of you to do that and to lower your price for the night. And encourage all of our listeners, whether you're here or on replay, pick up the book. Pick up 2.
Gio,
and give one away.
I got to say, what's that? I got to say, Gio, that Mary Kay actually she brought it up during one of our shows to somebody. She goes, "What would Gio today tell young Gio?" You did that with one of our other guests. And what would you? So let's go back to Gio, the child who was being bullied and who was being hurt and who was scared and building fear in his life. What would Gio today tell that person?
Okay, so this is actually something I've done, and this is something I do, and something I do with clients, and this is part of my childhood trauma therapy. Is guided imagery, right? So I've had to go back who I am now at the age I am now, and go back to that 7-year-old, and I picked a safe place, which was my bedroom at that time, and I had to go and I had to approach that 7-year-old, and I had to tell that 7-year-old everything he wanted to hear. That I love him and that he's protected and I'm going to protect him, and, that he is worthy, that he is adequate.
All right.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Now, I'd like to, there was a great man named James Lipton who ran the Actors Studio. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He used to interview a lot of famous people, and he'd ask them a series of questions. I just got a couple of questions, real quick questions, just a little bit more about Gio, real quick, just to wrap up our show. Gio, what's your favorite word? what is your favorite word?
You can swear. It's okay.
I don't know. Actually, I don't know if I've ever been asked this question.
That's why we're doing it.
Perfect.
I think my favorite word is probably equanimity, right?
Is what?
And equanimity.
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 Yeah.
Okay, it's
And
not
the
even a
reason
word. It's not even a word. Knock this
it's
shit
not.
off. What is it?
All right.
No, equanimity. I
So,
like that. I like that. Okay, so
so
what's your
is
least favorite word? What is your least favorite word?
hate. The word hate.
Good.
Oh,
Excellent. What is your favorite curse word?
Definitely the F word.
The F word. We go right for the gold standard. What profession other than what you do would you, if you could dream a profession to do, what would you be? What would you do? Without
That's
limit.
a hard one. That's a hard one. Actually, due to the opiate epidemic, we've lost a lot of people, and we're going to have a new generation growing up without mom and dad. So if I could, I'd have a nonprofit to teach these kids life skills and have like a home for them.
Okay.
wow.
Last question.
Sure.
If heaven exists and you arrive at the pearly gates, what would you like God to say to you?
My good and trustful servant, you did well.
All right.
Mm.
Fantastic. I like that. I like that. Gio, I
Beautiful.
want people to check you out. You're on Facebook. You're on, you're everywhere else. Check out his book on Amazon again. Fear, Face Everything and Rise. It's on Amazon and on sale, but pick this up. Watch for more. We expect great things from you, brother.
We do. No pressure.
Thank you. And thank you guys so much for having me.
Oh,
You know
we're
what?
honored that you're here.
Yeah, absolutely. We love finding people who have been inspired in their life and found ways through things. And your story, I'm going to tell you something. There are people out there, Mary, you and I would tell we've seen this. There's people out there with 2 cars in the driveway, living in a big old house, standing there looking in the mirror, just bitching about their life. And then we meet somebody like you, who's got a towel wrapped around their neck in a jail cell, looking at never seeing light again, possibly, and finding hope in that. So what is your excuse for not facing your fears? What is your excuse for not getting shit done? What is your excuse, people? Because let me tell you something. If you're standing there in your house looking in a mirror with 2 cars in the driveway, you don't have an excuse. Get shit done. Do something. Start facing your fears. Start living a better life. Mary, how do you want to wrap this up?
Ooh, sing it, Scott. Wow. How do I want to wrap this up? It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor listening to your story, Gio. I wish you, all the best and many, 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 many more years of health and helping others. And you're a shining example of no matter how bad things look, there is a way. There is something small that you can do. There's hope, and it's a matter of just taking that first tiny step.
Absolutely. Gio, any final thoughts, brother?
No, just thank you guys. Thank you guys for having me. And if anybody's listening and maybe they're struggling with mental health or substance abuse, recovery is possible. And if you listen to my story, I hope that you could see that, and reach out to someone. There's many of us in the recovery community willing to help.
There you go.
Beautiful.
And one of our listeners
Thank
just
you.
said they just while they were listening ordered your book. So there we go.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
There we go. All right. For our guest, Justin Giovinazzo, also known as Gio, Mary Kay, I'm Scott J. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Make sure that you do one thing nice for someone else and 2 things nice for yourself today. You'll never have a bad day. I'll catch you guys next time right here on The Life Between All or Nothing.